Hello everybody. In the previous lesson, we talked about fundamental forces in nature. But now, in this lesson, we will talk about accompanied forces to motion. Accompanied forces to motion. What's meant by the word accompanied forces to motion? It means the forces which comes with the motion of the object or which is related to the motion of the object. Now, we will talk about two types of forces related to motion, which are number one, forces originate due to the motion of the object, forces produced due to the motion of the object. Number two, forces which cause motion. In the first type, forces originate due to the motion of the object, just like forces of inertia, forces of friction. While in the second type, forces which cause motion, just like forces inside the living systems. Forces inside the living systems. Now we will talk about the first one of them, which is the inertia, the forces of inertia. What's meant by the forces of inertia? To know the meaning of the force of inertia, let's do an exercise. Try to put some of the pencils or try to put some of the objects in your hand. Now, what about the state of these objects? What about the state of the pens in your hand? Their state is static state. But when you move or when you run very fast in an empty room, their state is going to be in motion. Their state is going to be in motion. Try to stop suddenly. What happens? You will find that the object falls downwards on the ground. Why? Why did it happen? Because the objects try to keep the state. When you are in motion, these objects also are in motion. But when you try to change this state from being motion to rest, the objects fall downwards. The objects are unable to keep this state. The objects are not or can't keep the state of motion. This is because of inertia. So what's meant by the word inertia? Inertia means the property of an object that has to resist the change in the state of the object, which means that the object is unable to keep the state. The object need to keep his state, so he resists the change in the state. This state either be in motion or at rest. But when the object try to keep the state or try to keep the direction of motion, this property called inertia. So the inertia means the property by which the body tries to resist the change in the state or resist to change the direction of motion. Resist to change direction of motion. As you can see in this picture, the force of inertia here to keep the state of the rest, while in this picture the object try to keep the state of motion. So we have two different pictures, each one of them describe a certain state. In the two pictures, the object try to keep its state due to the force of inertia. There are many examples for the inertia, and you have these examples as you can see in this slide. There are many examples for the inertia. In each one of them the body tries to keep his state, and for each one of them there's a certain question which is give reason. Number one, the passengers and the drivers in the moving bus are rushed forward when the bus stops suddenly. When the bus stopped suddenly, it means that the bus was in motion, was in a state of movement. Okay? Now, when the bus stopped suddenly, the object tried to keep his state due to the force of inertia that make them resist the sudden stopping, that make them resist to change their motion state. Number two, the passengers and the drivers in the static bus means stopped bus, are rushed backwards when they move suddenly because due to the inertia and the body try to resist the sudden change. The third example is for a football player. rush forward and falls on the ground if he is tripped during running. Why? Due to the inertia for him that make him resist the sudden stopping. He resists the change in the state. He resists the change in the state. Number four, policemen. Number four, policemen advise drivers to use safety belts in cars and also in planes. Why? Because safety belts work on decreasing or stopping the force of inertia to prevent the driver from being injured or which prevent the driver from being harmed or hurt. These are some applications or some examples on the force of inertia. Let's come to the second type of forces, which is forces of friction. Friction means the force of resistance. The force of resistance or means resistance force. Force of friction means the resistance force against the motion of the object. What's meant by the word against motion of the object? As you can see in this picture, the word against the motion means in opposite direction to motion. When the motion of the object is in a certain direction, so the friction force originates or produced in the opposite direction to the motion. The friction force originates or produced between the objects in motion and the medium touching it. The objects in motion and the medium touching it. For example, the friction force, so the medium which in touch to the object may be gas, just like air, may be solid, just like ground, may be liquid, just like water. While you are moving on the ground, there's a friction force between your feet and also the ground. And also there's a friction force between your body all and the air. When you are swimming inside water, there's a friction force between you and the water. Now, the relation between the friction force and the speed of the object is inverse relation. The relation between the friction force and the speed of the object is inverse relation. What's meant by the inverse relation? By increasing the speed of the object, the friction force decreases. Once you use the brakes of the moving bicycle, its speed decreases gradually. When you use the brakes of the brakes of the bicycle or the brakes of the car, the speed of the car or the speed of the bicycle decreases gradually until it stops, because the friction between the tire of the bicycle and the brakes generates or produces friction force. So the friction is inversely proportional to the speed. By increasing the speed, the friction force decreases. The friction force has some benefits or some advantages and also have some disadvantages, or have some benefits and some harms. Now, the first one, the benefits of friction or the importance of friction or advantages of friction force. Number one, it prevents feet from slipping on road during walking. While you are walking on the road, the friction force prevents you from slipping on the road. Number two, it helps in stopping and starting the car motion. When I would like to stop the car, so I have to apply the brakes, so the speed of the car decreases until it stops. If I would like to move the car, I have to decrease the friction force or decrease the brakes so I can move the car. Number three, it helps in burning match. Car tires are covered with a very coarse substance to increase the friction force between the tires and the road to help the car in starting motion and stop. As you can see now, in the tire of the car there are many grooves or a lot of grooves. These grooves make the car increase or make the tire increase the friction force between the tire and the ground, which help the car not to slip down or which help the car not to skid out. Here, harms of friction